some time ago, it's kind of an older book, written in the 90s. A man named Ken Geyer wrote a book called Windows of the Soul. Have any of you heard of this book? It's an old devotional book. We read it years ago. And in that book, he tells a story about a time in his life when he's a writer.
When he needs to get real loud,
okay.
I can tell. And I just give it another second or so because you're going to have just more people coming.
Okay. Yeah, and if you need a chair, just grab one from the pile over there. So he hit a time in his life when he didn't have any money. And he really needed money badly. And a man contacted him with an opportunity to write for hire. And the kind of writing he was being asked to do was essentially like dime store novels, romance, paint-by-the-numbers books and thrillers. And a lot of it probably distasteful content to some extent. But he thought, well, this is a job writing, and I'll make money doing this. This is what I love. And he says, people's lives are dull. They want thrilling stories. What harm was it in simply giving them what they wanted? It was honest money. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't prostitution. Or was it? I think that story is a good example of a side of the arts that this class is designed to address. And it's a side of the arts that trips up a lot of people in our world. There are a lot of artists, a lot of musicians that study very intently at their craft. They invest all of their life savings. They get other people in their lives to invest in them. They move locations. They spend every waking hour thinking about how to pursue their craft and their career. And yet what they end up being confronted with once they leave the beginning stages of artistry behind, the studying, the technique, other things, they encounter a world of business. They encounter a world of ethical questions. They encounter a world that does not exactly line up with what they envision themselves doing. And so a lot of times, artists at the beginning have naive understandings about what they're going to do when they enter the real world, quote unquote. And then they're confronted with a lot of decision making. But nothing in their formation, nothing in their life has prepared them to make those decisions. So what this class is going to do is to try to fill in the gaps of what should guide our decision making when we're approaching the arts. The moral side of the arts, the spiritual side of the arts, how the technical side of the arts can reveal hidden truths, philosophical and theological truths, and essentially a framework that should guide not only our decision-making in the world, but should also determine who we are as people, who we are as artists. So let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this time together. I pray that you would just bless our time, bless this class, bless us spiritually, help for us to be in tune to you, in tune to your truth, in tune to your ways. And we thank you for all that you're doing. We ask this in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So, back in 2015, does anyone have a bottle of water? I just need water terribly. Back in 2015, there was a...
What? They open up the garage door. I bet a bunch of those kids would go out and play instead of being passive back there. Go ahead.
So in 2015, there was a Oscar Directors Roundtable. So every year, the Hollywood Reporter, that's one of the preeminent movie magazines that's in print, does a roundtable with the different directors who are in the running for Oscar nominations. They do this each year. And in 2015, the nominees were, in this particular roundtable, they invited Christopher Nolan, who had done Interstellar. How many of you saw Interstellar? Mike Leigh, who did Mr. Turner, a historical period piece, and very, very renowned director. They had Angelina Jolie, who did the movie Unbroken. Some of you have read that book, maybe seen the movie. They had Bennett Miller, who did Foxcatcher that year. He's probably more known for the movie Moneyball, starring Brad Pitt, baseball movie. They had Richard Linklater, who did Boyhood, and he's also done a really masterful film called, what is the name of that movie? Starring, you should see this. You should watch this movie. It's really something. Anyway, he does documentary movies, essentially. It's drama with documentary footage. So he blends real life and fiction. So he did the movie Boyhood, and then the director Morton Tildum, who did the movie The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, that's been on Netflix and other things. So these directors all got together, cream of the crop directors. And the man who was interviewing them, Stephen Miller, he asked them, what is the hardest ethical decision that you've ever made as a filmmaker? And it's fascinating to see their reaction. You can go online and look at the video. Because all across the board, nearly every single person at that round table got a really scared look on their face when that question was asked. They had no idea how to answer it. So Bennett Miller spoke up first, the one who did Moneyball. He says, I keep a pretty strong line between facts and what I'm doing, my art. Hey, Gianna, could you close the door, please? So, I keep a pretty strong line between facts and what I'm doing. There's reality, whatever that is, and it's really impossible to communicate that. It's just invention, really. So that was his response. And then Stephen, the moderator, he starts to ask the other directors about it. He says, what about the rest of you? And the other directors don't really have any response. And finally, Christopher Nolan says, well, honestly, why are you asking us this question?
What was the question you meant to say?
What is the hardest ethical decision you've ever had to make as a filmmaker? And Christopher Nolan says, why are you even asking me this question? What do ethics and film have to do with each other? And Stephen responds, and you can tell watching the video, he's kind of back on his heels a little bit. He says, well, Elia Kazan, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, who did On the Waterfront and other films, famously said that what every director needs is several things, but among them was ethics, a strong sense of ethics. And one of his best friends who disagreed with him, they broke up over this. They never spoke for decades because during the communist McCarthy era, Elia Kazan was very politically strident and vocal about his ethical perspective on that time, and the other man didn't want to have anything to do with it. So Stephen says, this is important. Elia Kazan thought it was important. Don't you all have an opinion on this? And so the other directors finally start to speak up, and so Miller says, I think we should acknowledge that artists are by nature deviants. We are not totally unrelated to the criminal mind. Truman Capote said that the most dangerous person was the artist because they are only ever going to be obedient to their own vision. We have to abandon conventional ways of thinking, conventional morals. Tildum, who did Imitation Game, he says, I agree. You have to be obsessed. Your instincts are what guide you. You have nothing more than instincts. So it goes around, everyone's kind of agreeing, and then Angelina Jolie speaks up, and she says, I don't disagree with that, but we are also other things. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a citizen. We're not just artists. I think you can be an artist, but be socially responsible at the same time. The room gets tense. There's a back and forth. And finally, after some debate, Jolie says, I need to be honest and responsible in who I cast and in what that symbolizes. Sometimes art can influence in a beautiful way, and sometimes it can be very damaging. Mike Leigh, who did Mr. Turner and many other films, he says, "My film, Naked, posed dilemmas about how much sexual violence to show without making it overwhelm the film." And then finally, Jolie says, it's really about the intention, being true to your intention to make that sort of film. So, these are some of the most highly paid, cutting-edge artists in their field. And yet they have really nothing but confusion when they're asked about the spiritual, the moral, and the philosophical side of the arts. All they have really are catchphrases. If you notice, just reading through it, little words, catchphrases that they've heard in school, that they've heard in their daily lives, interacting with peers and contemporaries. And this is all they have to really guide their decision-making as artists. Christopher Nolan at one point says, really the only thing I've ever discovered when I'm thinking about films is what works, what the audience likes. So just a total pragmatism. Jolie has a little more of an ethical side to what she's doing, but at the end she says, it's really just about your intentions. Are you communicating what you want to communicate? And then, of course, Bennett Miller is the classical deviant idea, which is essentially to say that the arts are a form of lying. All of the arts are fictitious, they're invention. None of it is real. A movie is fake. A song is an experience. It's not really true. There's nothing really true in the arts, per se. It's all just human invention. And how clever can we be? So, looking through those responses, a few questions can be posed to us. The first is, does art and morality have anything to do with one another? Do they have anything to do with one another? Do they exist in separate spheres, or do they blend together? And I know for us, most of us here are believers and we think of things in a Christian way. That is a very controversial question today. Many, many, many people that you will encounter if you go to New York City or LA or any other major place that does the arts for a living, for a business, will question whether the arts and morality have anything to do with each other. Number two, if they do have anything to do with each other, how? How? It's a very difficult question, isn't it? In some ways. There may be easy cases, but when you really peel back the layers, it's not hard to remember conversations. I've had many conversations like this. Well, should I go see that movie? Well, no. Well, I will, but why? And what's your line? What's my line? It's very hard to draw a line. Different people draw different lines different places. So what is the line? Number three, what is art even? What is it? What are we talking about when we talk about art? Is it invention? Is Miller right? Is it just a creation? Is it fictitious? Is it deviant? Meaning it is always leading us away from the truth, which is factual and real. Is that what art is? What is its relation to truth? Number four, what is morality? Is it primarily about how we treat other people? Or is it deeper? When Jolie tried to respond to that, she immediately thought of social morality. I have a social bond to other people. But is that really how far morality goes? Is morality only influential on the arts, dependent on its effect on audiences, per se? And then finally, is it possible for an artist to be a moral artist? A different version of this question is, what would it mean to be a Christian artist? What would it mean to be an artist in a Christian manner? So these are deep questions, and they may seem heady. They may seem rarefied and kind of like a college course that I skipped long ago, or would rather not have taken, but they're really essential to basic decisions that we're going to make in our lives. So for instance, you decide you're going to become a recording artist. You encounter a producer and he says, "You know, honey, sex sells. You should wear this dress. It's not wrong. You have a beautiful body." What do you say? How do you interpret that moment? How do you respond? Or another scenario, a powerful executive tells you that you should add a song to your album. This song is about a woman destroying her ex-boyfriend's truck with a baseball bat. And she says, "You know, this will make you more accessible to ordinary women and their struggles." This is a totally plausible scenario. This is not even made up. This has happened before, many times. What do? How do you respond? How do you interpret that? How do you gauge the line? Scenario 3. You have an idea. You're walking along one day and you have a great idea. This hook appears to you out of the blue. And it's a little bit tawdry. Maybe, for whatever reason, this hook involves foul language, or maybe it's a little edgy. It has a sexual edge to it. And you think, boy, that's a clever idea. I bet that could be a hit. I bet I could make money with that song. What do? What do you think about that?
Well, let me put it like, some people are not like I think about this all the time, like doing recording sessions where like you're asked to go in and play strings. Okay, so you go play violin on somebody's record. Well, is it wrong to go and play strings for some big producer in town? And yeah, you're not singing those words, but you're still participating in some artistic moment that's going to go out somewhere, propagating some idea.
Right.
And half the time you go out and you think, what was that song about?
Half the time you don't even know what the song is before you go do the session.
Yeah, you would never know. You'd never know if you were going in to sing a song, to play violin on some song about, drug use and explicit sexual promiscuity or whatever. You wouldn't hardly even ever know.
Right. Or take this example. So you're an actor and you get 2 scripts. One script has a lot of foul language in it, foul content, but at the end it's about redemption. The criminal gets redeemed. The other one is family friendly, doesn't have any content in it, but it involves a lesbian romance. Do you accept either of them? Is one okay because it ends with a redemptive message? Is the other okay because it doesn't have any real bad content except this thing I don't really agree with over here? I'm not being asked to act anything bad in this movie. I might disagree with the point of it. But over here I'm being asked to do things I don't think are good. But the point is worthy. What about a question like that? Here's a very rarefied scenario, just to push your minds a little bit. You are commissioned to build a house. You realize that you can buy cheaper materials that will not last as long, but it will bring more money to your pocket. Is it ethical to choose the cheaper material? So that's an example of getting to almost the artisan side of it. We're getting away from the fine arts to just doing work that's ethical, doing work that's moral, doing work that reflects Christ. So what does this mean? So, question 1, what is art? What is art? So, there are a few answers that are pretty prevalent today. The first answer is, art is me. Art is me. I will demonstrate my lack of penmanship very briefly. Art is me. Art is me. So the key phrases that tell you that someone is thinking in this manner are phrases like my art, my music, my vision. This reflects who I am. In this definition, art is primarily self-expression. Genuine emotion is what makes art good or bad, moral or immoral. Art is primarily about honesty and being vulnerable. How many of you have heard an interview with an artist that said, this came out of such a difficult part of my life. And this is me at my most vulnerable. And I just know that. And there's a Christian version of this, which is, God gave me this song. And it's all.
God gave me this song. I heard a guy one time in a songwriting contest, and he answered that by the judge answered saying, God gave you that song because he didn't want it.
Yeah. So art is me. And you know that this is the way it is, because if you critique that art, suddenly you're critiquing my art? This art isn't just something I did, it's me. It's about my emotional intention. It's about whether or not I really felt these things when I went through this experience. So art becomes conflated with the subject, the person. It's subjective. Definition, you can write this down. And all of you should have notepads, by the way. Make notes of these things. So, subjective. Definition of the word subjective. Taking place in the subject. Anything that is subjective takes place within the subject. It's definition of subjective. Now, this view of the arts is called emotivism. emotivism. And it means that our emotion is self-justifying. If I feel it, it is automatically valid. Anything I experience, if I experience it, and if I have a take on that experience. So somebody says, I'm in an immoral relationship, but it feels great to me. Emotivism. The emotion. If it feels this right, it can't be wrong. Yeah, that's a perfect encapsulation of that. Lots of songs, right. In this view, sincerity is the primary measurement of good or bad, whether I'm sincere or not. If I'm sincere, it can't be wrong. Art as a form becomes increasingly subjective. So, what is the hook of this perspective of the arts? The hook is honesty. Everybody wants to be honest. Everybody wants connection. So when you say, this makes me feel vulnerable, this is me being vulnerable in front of you, this is an appeal to our desire to connect with other people. And that's a very powerful aspect of the arts. The arts connect us. Songs connect us. We bond very strongly over artistic experiences. That's why a couple says, listen, honey, that's our song. And there are many other examples we can think about. The arts bond people. And so people who find this perspective of the arts to be very plausible are people who genuinely want connection, and they want vulnerability. They want honesty. And yet, even as this worldview distorts truth, which is what honesty is about, really. It's about truth, being true, being sincere, being honest and real. It also distorts that, because we lose the other two components of good art. So we have truth, beauty, and goodness. When we idolize truth at the expense of beauty and goodness, particularly goodness in this case, goodness is what is denied by art is me. We have a warped definition of truth. And in the end, people who really buy into this end up deceiving themselves. Because when we privilege emotion, we take ourselves out of the realm of reality and we begin to believe in a series of emotional responses which separate us from a grounded sense of what is true and objective. So, something that we will find often is that when we idolize one thing above anything else in the arts, we end up losing the very thing we idolize. People who idolize honesty and vulnerability end up losing the content of truth. They're just left with an emotional experience. So what's the next perspective? Art is what pleases. That's the next definition. So you see this in Christopher Nolan saying, whatever works for the audience, that's what guides me. Other phrases are art for art's sake. You might have heard that phrase. It's what I like. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I go with what I think is good. The definition of this is art is whatever pleases the partaker or the creator. It exists for its own sake without reference to anything else, including morality, religion, or politics. This is called aestheticism. 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 It could also be called hedonism. It easily turns into hedonism. It sees the drive for pleasure as the primary and self-justifying aim of the artist. So if people like it, if it's a hit, if it's making money, if I hear it and I go, ooh, I get the jitters when I hear this. Once I heard, how many of you know One Republic? You know the artist One Republic? The lead singer of One Republic, I read an interview where he said, when I write songs, I just write until I go, ooh, that feels so good.
You can tell.
Now, something to note. People can believe all of these perspectives and still make good art. They can still produce good things, meaning things that are attractive, things that are well made, things that reveal technical excellence. But it doesn't mean that the philosophy that creates it or the philosophy it communicates is necessarily true or grounded. So, a famous story I like connected with aestheticism is the story of Oscar Wilde's final hours. Have y'all heard this story? So Oscar Wilde was dying, and he was in this shoddy hotel room, and there was this ugly wallpaper all around him. And he said, either that wallpaper goes or I do. Oscar Wilde, though, was a famous proponent of aestheticism. And if you watch his movies, The Importance of Being Earnest, or his plays, but many of them have been made into movies, Oscar Wilde is constantly promoting this idea that whatever pleases is justifiable. It's what's good. Whatever pleases. So another key definition.
Oscar Wilde was.
Right, so Oscar Wilde was a playwright in Victorian and Edwardian England at the turn of the 1800s. Very, very successful playwright. He was homosexual. He died of sexually transmitted diseases. And he was briefly jailed at the time because his lifestyle was outlawed. So he died shortly after, and there's some confusion about whether, there's some rumor that maybe he might have converted before he died, but we're not really sure. But he was infamous. He was kind of the Elton John of his time, if you can kind of connect that. So aestheticism...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are we still on Artist Me?
No, we're on...
Right.
Yeah, I will do.
Yeah.
I will put
Yeah.
our attention to that. So art
Artists.
is what is pleasing. Art is what pleases. So aestheticism was really kicked off by a man named Walter Pater, English gentleman who lost his faith when he was young, went to a lot of Oxford major schools, and he began to write about cathedrals and Renaissance art. He had an experience in a cathedral when he was young, and he was so overwhelmed by the beauty that he just started researching all of the art forms. He read John Ruskin. We'll talk about Ruskin later. But he was deeply influenced by the Romantics and the Pre-Raphaelites. And he went to Italy just to tour all of the structures and the Renaissance artwork that was there. And he wrote these tomes that became wildly popular, and people would buy him. And his whole philosophy was, fill your life with beauty. Fill your life with as many beautiful things as you can. And there was a famous conclusion to one of his books that he wrote called his Conclusion. And in it, he details his vision of human consciousness. And basically, we're in this mirage. All these impressions are coming at us all the time. Some of it's true, some of it's false. We can't really tell. And we're just in this stream of consciousness. But, and this is a quote, every moment, some form grows perfect in hand or face. Some tone on the hills or the sea is choicer than the rest. Some mood of passion or insight or intellectual excitement is irresistibly real and attractive for us, for that moment only. Through such discrimination, we may, quote, get as many pulsations as possible into the given time we have. To burn always with this hard, gem-like flame, to maintain this ecstasy, is success in life. So we're supposed to chase after the daffodil, chase after the cathedral and the museum and the painting and the sunset. And by the way, a lot of people live this way. This is not just some people. Have you ever met someone say, usually a very wealthy person, maybe on their second marriage and living in Florida, say, I just sit in the sunset and I love to read the golf course lifestyle. It's about chasing that next wave of excitement and reality and beauty. So what is the hook of this worldview? The hook is beauty. It's saying, if you pursue beauty above all else, then you're really connected with the truth. You're connecting with what is really true. There's a wonderful passage. I wanted to find it, but I don't have it. From Willa Cather's book, The Professor's House. How many of you have read a Willa Cather book? Oh my goodness. That is so sad. Y'all need to go home and read Death Comes for the Archbishop right away, because she's one of the greatest novelists of all time. But in this book, there's a portion where she talks about, in the book, there's a professor, and he has a friend. And this friend had this theory. And in the book, this is actually, I think, pre-conversion. She had a conversion later in life. But in the book, the professor has a friend, and this friend has a theory that art and religion are the same thing. That the experience you have in the museum and the experience you have in prayer are really just the same thing. Brad Pitt believes this. He said, I left church when I realized that I could get the same thrill at a rock concert that I could at church. So a similar idea, when we privilege the experience of beauty, the elevation we feel when we see something beautiful or transporting, we idolize beauty. And what happens? Well, we lose the thing we idolize. Because what happened to Oscar Wilde, the man who chased beauty all of his life? He ended up dying of a horrible disease in a filthy hotel room. That's what happens. It's what happens when we idolize beauty. And that's why all the romantics, the farther and farther you get along the romantic movement and the aesthetic movement, the impressionists, you start to see them all die or commit suicide. Picasso. It's Van Gogh. It's the logical outflow, because after a while you run out of experiences. Your senses get fried. There's nothing left to experience, and you're left with nothing. You're left with nihilism. So a final perspective on art, we'll close with this. Art is power. Art is power. So this is what Bennett Miller, who made Moneyball and Foxcatcher, was really saying. Some key phrases are art is deviant. He said that phrase. It makes people uncomfortable. Have you ever heard someone say, real art makes people uncomfortable? It shakes them out of their apathy. It inspires action. It's about the truth. Makes little people powerful. See this a lot. And now, in Hollywood, you'll even see headlines all the time about, there should be more black actors in the film. Where's the gay actor? Where's the transsexual actor? Where's the film about my cause?
Where's the women directors?
Where's the woman director? Yeah, you see this constantly. And the idea behind this is that the arts are arbitrary. They're inventions. There's nothing about the arts that are objective. They're all about people just control. It's about control. So white people write movies for white actors. And black people ought to write movies for black actors. And we all should just do whatever we can to push our agenda. Because the arts are arbitrary anyway, and the only way to make good art is art that pushes the envelope. That makes people go, what? Lady Gaga. What? What's that cover? It's about shock. It's about awakening us out of our apathy.
Well, and it works in the reverse too. Like in the Christendom world, it becomes, I'm making a movie about saving people for Jesus, or I'm making a movie about real life, good, moral families, right? But the purpose of it is, it's just all agenda. It's
right.
My agenda.
Well, the arts become the slave of propaganda. Propaganda. That's an important word. You all should write that. Propaganda is a twisting of the arts. The arts can have content, but when the arts are simply abused, the abuse of art is when we use art for something other than what it was created to do. So this perspective is called postmodernism. It sees art as primarily political and useful for social change. It tends toward irony and or propaganda. Irony, key word, definition, incongruity between the actual result of a sequence of events and the normal or expected result, or an event or result marked by such incongruity. So that word incongruity, it's important because with irony, and you'll see this in a lot of plays written by postmodern playwrights, like there's a famous play called Waiting for Godot. I don't know if you've heard of this play, Waiting for Godot. But it's really a pun because Godot is God. And you never see Godot. Godot never shows up. It's two men on the stage, and they're waiting for Godot, or God. And the whole play is nothing but kind of strange, meaningless interactions, and at the end they just walk off the stage. It's irony. It's like we came to the play to see Godot arrive, but Godot doesn't arrive.
The third character is the guy who comes in to abuse them all and tells them that he works for Godot.
Right.
But then they don't actually know Godot exists.
Right. So an anti-church idea. So what is the hook of this idea? The hook is power, or being right. It's goodness. The third element of good arts. We have truth, beauty, and now we've idolized goodness. And goodness